Welcome to another episode of Unstructured Unlocked. I'm Michelle Gouveia and I'm joined with co-host Chris Wells for today's topic on intelligent intake. So, Chris, this one's kind of my fault. I feel like we've been talking about data and the value of data within the insurance industry and how it influences or impacts underwriting workflows and claims workflows. And I think it probably warrants its own deep dive, specifically submission intake on the underwriting side, because it's such a key workflow and key component of the insurance industry, right? A lot of times that's how consumers first interface with insurance carriers is, I need insurance. Here's all of my information. And so on the flip side, thinking about how insurance carriers take that information in, what they use it for, the process at which that happens, I think is really interesting and is an area that we spend a lot of time looking at. And I think that you can chime in on some really interesting takes on the intelligent automation and RPA side.
If you're I'll try. I know just pretty much everything about intake and insurance, but maybe you could tell our audience what intake is and I'm sure there are layers of complexity here that you can help us unpack.
Yeah, so I think the first thing I would mention is it looks different. There's not one standard submission process, right? And it varies by product line. So, your experience, I'll talk about it from the insurance carrier side, but even as a consumer, your experience, if you're personally searching for insurance, looking to buy insurance, is going to differ from a small business trying to buy insurance, as well as large corporations looking to buy insurance. And those processes are all different. On the personal line side, right, you've seen and all the big names, advertise this all the time. It's so easy to get a quote, right? Because you just go online, right? Most people are buying their home and auto insurance online. So that's one form of intake where there's already a digital front end that the carriers have, and all of that information theoretically is feeding directly into a database of some sort where those fields are already mapped.
And can I ask one question there? My mental model of insurance is you have the end user, like the policyholder, and then you have like a broker between, and then you have the carriers. So on the personal line side, are brokerages just gone now that we have these web portals?
Not gone, but definitely disrupted, I would say, on the personal line side. Now that model very much so, and this is my opinion. You'll have different schools of thought on this depending on who you talk to. There's some that believe that the small commercial insurance industry, so small business insurance, is going the way of personal lines, where you're going to have that I go online and try to buy my business insurance. And then you have another group, myself included, that thinks that for small commercial or commercial insurance, it's more complex and the needs of a business will shift as the business grows and develops. And so you will need that special touch, that knowledge base from an agent or a broker that says, I understand your insurance needs, and there's a lot out there, and you may be underinsured, or you might be missing a few key policies. So that actually gets to my second point. So thank you for teeing that up.
You're welcome.
From a submission standpoint, insurance carriers are also getting their submissions from different sources. And so if you think of an insurance carrier has partnerships with 4 or 5 or 6 brokers, or numerous agencies, they're getting that information from those brokers and agents in different ways. If they've got an agent portal that those agencies have to sign into and then manually input information, it could come in via email. It could come in, depending on how they're interacting, on a monthly bordereau where it says, these are all the policies that I've bound for your company this month. Like, here they are, now put them into your system.
Sorry, I have to ask, what's a bordereau?
Think of it as just like one long Excel list with all of the information about the policies that are written. So the name, address, policy number, all of those data points, insurance coverage, et cetera.
Gotcha.
And so that is, how do you ingest Excel? And one could argue, well, in Excel, it's probably structured, right? You've got a column, you've got all the inputs, but if you've got,
right.
if you're working with 20 brokers, they might have all the same data points, but have it formatted differently or input it differently. And so then on the back end, any type of like rules-based or template automation breaks down, right? Tons of errors. And then you've got, I'll say middle market commercial insurance, which is usually you're a big corporation, you're trying to get one huge policy with a ton of different coverages in one, right? Okay. And that's very email driven, things locked in PDF and email attachments going directly to these underwriters in their systems. So intake looks different for each carrier based on what channel and what line of business those things are coming in through. And there's even from just that kind of 3-minute overview, probably a lot of pain points that you can isolate on what's happening at the insurance carrier level. Yeah.
Yeah, my experience talking to insurers about these challenges have highlighted a handful of pain points, which were, they were in there. I mean, one is everything, especially on the, large commercial lines, like you pointed out, everything's super bespoke, right? And so, if you wanted to automate this process, right, that means you have to read the email, and emails, I've told people this, email is like the most unstructured of all of the unstructured data, because you can say whatever you want. You don't have to stick to any kind of template. You can attach anything you want, including more emails to the email. And those things may have attachments. It's this huge nested, crazy data structure. But anyway, you have to read the email. You have to figure out what someone's asking. Do they identify the coverages that they want? Do they reference documents? Are those documents referenced, then attached? And you have to go find those things. And you have to pull out, like, it might be an accord form, right? So you have to pull out all of the infinite detail that's in like an accord 125. Plus policies, plus, say they've attached something like a loss runs history. And you were talking about bordereaux being big tables. We have a saying in Indico R&D that there's no such thing as a table, because people they'll dump whatever data they want and they'll put table 1 on top of it. It's like, I'm sorry, you have like 6 levels of nesting here. This is not fair. You can't call this a table. So that's one of the pain points, is just the overwhelming amount of data and the need to be able to reference one data point like the email against the attachment that came in and tie all of that together in a bundle.
And there's the identification, right, of the data that's sitting in that unstructured, I'll even call it semi-structured input, right? And then there's ingesting it in a way that's you try to automate it in a sense so that it's not just manual entry, which takes a ton of time. Human error can happen. And then how do you make it? I talked about this on the first time we chatted about making that information usable, right? So you've got the data, you've got it usable in the sense that you pulled it out, but now how do you use it to make business decisions? How do you take all this information and decide that you are going to underwrite this policy, that you do want to bind this policy? Like how do you elevate that the data that's come in hits up against some processing exception that requires a deeper look or a different workflow? And just how do you make that process as efficient and accurate as possible? And that's not even, now I'm just on a rant.
No, stay on the soapbox as long as you want.
Yeah. That's not even getting into how do you take the data that's coming during this process and validate that it's even correct, right? So what other third-party
Exactly.
information are you pulling in? What system does that happen in, right? Where are those checks and balances? What are the I'll call it the pings that like alert someone that it needs a second look? And then how do you continue that workflow?
Yeah, and that gets to one of the other pain points I was going to mention, which is, and we use humans to solve all of these right now for the most part, which is like, you have to get the data. So you have a bot, right? And it finds, here's a word, and that's the word you care about. But then you have to rationalize it. Like, you're probably going to have to look up the creditworthiness of whoever you might be underwriting, right? And they may not use the corporate entity name that's in your database that then connects to like Dun and Bradstreet or whatever it is to figure that stuff out. So it's not just like, you don't just need a computer to read the information for you. You have to actually reason about it and connect the dots, to your point.
Well, and
that's a big
and you
one
just touched that. This one is not specific to intake per se, but on that data accuracy side, one of the biggest pain points on the commercial side is like classifying a business, right? And depending on how that business is classified, will identify how big of a risk it is, right? So if you're like, I don't know, you submit your NAICS code that you're a restaurant, and there's like 4-digit, 5-digit, 6-digit, and they all get very, very detailed. But so you're a restaurant and you don't identify that there's like, I don't know, liquor things or like a bar, right? But that's probably a different risk than if you're just like a sandwich shop restaurant, right? And so if that information is not made available to the underwriter, they're probably pricing that risk inaccurately.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, and they made the best decision they could given the data that they had, right? So that's another pay point, right? Is just how do I know when I've got everything, right? How do I know that the submission is complete? And so
exactly.
I think high level, the pain point is really just takes a lot of human gray matter to do this really well. And so you end up with knock-on effects, which and again, I'm not an expert in this. This is just from talking to folks, where you can't quote all the business that's submitted to you. You just don't have time, and you don't know if you're quoting the right business because it's just like, there's this constant queue that's building up. That's what I've seen.
Yeah, and this gets to the whole idea, or the happy place, right? The happy state is you get all this data in a way that it's complete, so you're not missing any information. You validated the accuracy of it in some kind of checks and balance that happens in your system. You hit it up against, so from an underwriting perspective, you've got all this information. You hit it up against some type of rules-based underwriting, box that says, yes, this checks these boxes. This is a standard risk. Automatically quote and bind that, right? Like low touch, like high frequency, low touch work that is just like super easy to get through is where you want to get to. And then if there's something that hits up and is an exception to those underwriting rules or needs a different look, or maybe there's a request for higher policy limits or something nuanced, then that's where, going back to just the human capital, right, is that's where people can spend their time. It's more valuable to spend their time on the stuff that needs another look, as opposed to just like, I don't want to use the term pushing paper, but essentially just like checking digital the box paper. That like you reviewed it and that it's gone through. So that to me is like the end state of, you hear a lot about like automation goals and streamlining and making people more effective and more efficient. And I think that's an area where intake can really help.
Yeah. The other nice side effect of having that intake, maybe if you just describe the dream state, I'll describe nirvana, which is you capture all of that data on the decision making, right? And we talked about this last time, and you can cycle it back through. And now you have this long queue of things. Well, these 10 in the row, I'm not going to quote. We just don't quote that. It doesn't turn out well. So skip those altogether. And now not only have you streamlined the process individually, you've streamlined the whole queue, and you're only quoting, and as fast as possible, you're quoting and binding the stuff that you really want. that all has to happen in the context of an existing tool chain. And I don't know a whole lot about what the types of software, the types of tools that folks are using. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
I can try.
Okay.
because like all my other answers today, it's nuanced and it differs. You've got the core systems, right? So that do policy administration, claims handling, billing. So presumably you've got a number of carriers that have upgraded their core systems where some of this is out of the box capability, or it's been customized where it's just easy to connect in and say, like, this field should plug into this field in my system, right? And then it's in there automatically. There's a lot of there was a huge push many years ago, and that probably still exists, where a lot of carriers have built their own agency or broker portal. So if I'm an agent sitting at the Michelle Gouveia agency, like, I have to log in to a carrier portal to quote business for them, right? And so in some cases I'm doing that for multiple carriers, or sometimes there's kind of a catch-all, but how is that front end, or how's that portal integrate to your policy administration system? It's probably a different connection with the same goal in mind, right? It's the same information you're trying to capture. If it's personal lines, it's your website, that should be linked behind the scenes. Excel is probably still something that's getting used a ton.
Of course it is. Yeah.
And then, there's all these other like software solutions and things to help with reporting. And to some extent, there may even be, when something comes in the door, some type of report that gets run to assess like what's in the queue.
Okay.
And then organized by maybe skill set, by underwriter type. Potentially, like, there's a lot of homegrown like workflow, like work management systems too. I know that in my time at carriers, there was just a lot of homegrown like work management, or like assignment front ends that were built.
Interesting stuff that you would do now with systems, like Asana or Jira or some kind of tool like that.
Yeah.
So you've named like 5 or 6 different systems that all of this data has to pass through in some fashion. That is complex.
Yeah, and you've got some carriers that are only doing like only personal lines, right? And so you would presumably there's a pretty it looks the same internally, but for these multi-line carriers that are writing personal lines, commercial lines, life insurance, that this is all, it's different data into different systems that's probably got different rules on how you store that data, how you can use that data for pricing and underwriting, and even how long you can keep that data. So there's a lot there. But it all starts with getting it in the door in a way that hopefully is not super manual, that's accurate, and that can be pushed through in a usable format. And I think what a big opportunity is, less so in the lines that are more standard, right? More like or commoditized, even like these really niche, like specialty insurance lines is where like is really where an automated solution can be really helpful, because you're collecting a lot more detailed or granular information, right? So if you like if you're like pilot insurance, right? Like if like pilot like a personal plane, like that's a whole different that's probably a very lengthy application with a lot of critical details on how to underwrite that. But even on the personal line side, right? Like it can get complex probably if you're submitting a request for a primary home, a secondary home, maybe you own a boat in addition to like your vehicles. Like there's
some kind of umbrella you have to collect for all of that.
But I'm talking about from the system perspective, right? Like how do you then turn on to say, they've answered this question this way, so now we need to open up this whole other subset of questions on the submission, and we need to make sure that it gets into the system, even if it's not standard.
Yeah.
I guess.
All right. Well, this makes me think.
I'm quickly getting outside my expertise in the area, but
really interesting information. It makes me think that if you're out there working in the data org at an insurance company, you should send a thank you email to your CDO for worrying about all of these things at night. You said a couple things in there which piqued my curiosity. One of them was that it might be that automation would help most in the specialty cases, and I wanted to double click on that.
My hypothesis. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because normally, normally folks think of, well, let's automate like the bread and butter, the simple stuff because it's so high volume. But you're pointing out something else, which these can be so complicated that it's worth having an automated double check on them. I think that's what you're telling me.
Well, but it's because it's so complex and it's usually very manual. What incremental benefits can come from automating the intake or doing the check so that the real time is spent analyzing the data that's in that submission as opposed to just getting the data in the door for that submission, if that makes sense, right? Gotcha. Because there's some of those specialty lines just are so complex that they are always going to need that they're not going to be one of those risks that you do just pass through the system and say like it's table stakes. So you may not the automation isn't going to happen end to end on those, but to automate a piece of it to then spend the time where the true value of that underwriting function sits within that line, I think is an area that is ripe for the benefits of intelligent automation.
Yeah, that raises a good point, which is that I think a lot of folks think about automation as I have this end-to-end process. It's not automated until the whole thing is just one smooth tube that it goes through. Whereas in fact, you've pointed out that these insurance systems across carriers, lines, the whole ecosystem, they're really a lot of different systems that talk to each other with sort of human hands moving stuff from one to the next. And you can find benefits in automating intake along the way. It's not all or nothing. Like you can carve it up into relevant pieces and then streamline those and then go to the next lily pad and build something, right?
Yeah, and all that depends on what are the goals that the carrier or whoever the entity, right? It could be an MGA that's trying to do this. It could be a broker that's trying to automate some of their workflows internally too. I don't want to say that it's just insurance carriers that are doing this.
Okay.
What are they trying? What is the goal that they're trying to meet? What are the metrics that they have today? What are they trying to get to? What's the ROI that like intelligent automation or intake can help them with? And that'll vary, right? And some of it is that pie in the sky. I want this completely automated. And some of it is I really need to get the data in the door in a way that doesn't take 5 different double checks and manual entry into the system, and then all of these approvals and things like that have to happen.
And I've seen a range. You raised the specter of ROI, and I've seen quite the range of approaches and behaviors out in the wild across industries, but insurance is very much the same with regard to this. And I would say there's like a spectrum, and on one end of the spectrum is, well, the automation has to be highly accurate. And, if you can't show me 100% accuracy, then we're not going to do it. And I've said this many times on the podcast, that's dumb, naive at best, in the sense that, your process has to be 100% accurate. That's like, of course, table stakes. You can't make mistakes. We get it. But accuracy doesn't have units on it. Like you can't directly convert it to dollars like you could something like time, right? So more sophisticated organizations are looking at metrics that actually influence the business outcomes, right? So, if you're in the small business or the personal lines, like what happened to our quote to buying time when we introduced this automation? And of course, you're checking the accuracy, but now it's the accuracy of humans plus whatever automation and rules, and it's RPA and it's AI, it's all of these things. But sophisticated organizations that are talking that kind of language, and they've done the homework about like, this is what moves the needle, and these are what we think are the gears behind that needle that we need to replace with new gears, those are the organizations that I want to talk to because they're actually going to do something.
Well, you can speak directly to a business outcome, right? What's the business outcome?
Exactly.
You were able to, So, which I think I said it the first time we chatted too. That's what when you're looking to sell to insurance carriers, what is the business outcome that you're selling, right? The technology is important, like I said, and harkening back to when we first started chatting about this, like, you have to have something. The technology is important, but like a rules-based, you can sell a rules-based template to somebody, but it's going to break the instant that that something falls outside of that. Where the intelligent intake side, and you're by far the expert on this, not me, it is I can identify that this information is here. It's not in the right place, but because I'm smart enough to know that I'm not breaking your process, or I'm not, putting a name where an address belongs, or something like that. So to get to your accuracy standpoint, right? Like that's the inaccuracy that eventually people not believe in the capabilities of automating some of these things. And
that's a good point I didn't even mention, which is like there are different levels of inaccuracy, right? Like if you can still go through the whole process, then maybe that data element that you pulled out, it might be valuable somewhere else. It might just be a legacy part of the process. You should really think about your process before you automate it.
That's a very good point. Very good point. Automating a broken process is still going to result in broken outcome.
Yeah, it'll just break faster.
Yeah,
and then more repeatedly. Last time we talked about this, we were giving the advice to the insurtech entrepreneur out there, but this is also advice to like the insurtech salesperson. If they're not speaking the right language, you're going to go through some pilot with this prospect. You're going to do some POC, and you're both going to waste a lot of time and end up heartbroken. So I think of this, and look, not a salesperson. I've never sold anyone anything as far as I know. But if you're not on the same page, then this is not a pursuit for you. This should be part of your qualification process up front.
Exactly. And that goes back to what I like, you could sell the technology, but if you're not actually sure what the goal is, then there's no incentive to say, well, I'm going to take a shot on this tech versus this tech if you don't really understand the desired outcome. But most importantly is, as the buyer, you have to know the desired outcome, right? Is it to automate a piece of it? Is it to automate the whole thing? What is that range of, to your point, of accuracy, right? Or it might even not have to, like, I'm going to counter what you said, like 100% accuracy is important. 100% accuracy should be what you aim for. But if current accuracy is 50%, and you can automate to 75, that's an incremental, progression towards that 100. As the system gets smarter, then hopefully you get to that 100. But that automation can already improve it.
No, absolutely. Now you're implying that people actually know what the accuracy of their processes is, and I don't see that a lot, honestly. Which is a shame.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I just aired some dirty laundry, but I didn't use any names, so I think it's okay. Speaking of accuracy, and you actually mentioned it earlier, and I wanted to circle back to this because I was curious. Exception handling in the intake process, like what are the exceptions, and like what does that do to the process? Like how does that tree branch? Any thoughts you had? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so like from my experience working at within the insurance industry. And it was specialty lines. It was very, very specific. Like some of those exceptions could be, some of the exceptions could be like you want higher policy limits than what is standard, right? And so how does that change the underwriting? How does that change the pricing? Because you have like your standard underwriting box, right, where things fit nicely. And then a lot of times if there's maybe, so an exception could be maybe they don't underwrite that particular industry code that your business falls into, right? And so do you kick it out? Is there do you just decline that? Is there like a nuance to that where they might underwrite it, but they might price you higher because it's a little bit riskier, or the policy is written a little bit differently. Like what are so that's one example, right? And I'm thinking commercial lines, specialty lines specifically on that. Like the big example, right, is like cannabis, right? Like there's a lot, like there's a lot of like if you're a cannabis like sell that, like a lot of insurance carriers won't underwrite that, right? So that's an industry code, that's an exception to that, but you may not know that. Like you'd have to get all the right data and the right NAICS code in to understand that that's what that business does. So that's one example. So how does that kick out? And then like you could, even from a personal line standpoint, just exceptions would. So what's interesting too is I wonder, this is not an area I'm an expert in, but I wonder if so you get in the submission intake, right? And you identify that there's an error, like it hits up against some third-party data set, and you've identified that there's an inaccuracy on that submission, right? Like how does that kick out, right?
Yeah,
like,
back to like the creditworthiness, right? Like yeah. So you said that, and I'm not putting out there that anyone is insurance fraud, none of that. Like the actual just errors, like mistakes, like you forgot to add the plus sign on like I have a second car, right? So it's like, is there like what's the process when you've done validation and it says like they submitted their application saying that they had a single car and now they've got two others to insure? What's the process there? Like on a digital front end, like it says, are you sure? Like, because usually it's hitting up against some database and it tells you what cars you have. But to the extent that you're doing it manually or not in that system, there's some of that too, I'm sure. That's interesting. It also reminds me that one of the benefits you get from digitizing these workflows is, you sort of built a map of the process, and some of it's done by humans and some of it's done by bots and some of it you reach out to an external database, but exceptions are places where it like leaves the normal order. And if you've built the system or bought the right system, then you know how often that's happening. And I have to imagine out there that there are exceptions that aren't terribly exceptional. It's just, we haven't built a process specifically for them.
That's a great point, actually. And what are the exceptions that we don't know about yet, right? Especially if you've got a new product that you're rolling out, or you're rolling it out in a new geography or something where there's some nuance to, what questions you can ask on the application. Because going back to that highly regulated industry that's done, district by district, or state by state, but 56 jurisdictions, that differs. And so internally, actually, those systems need to be programmed with the regulatory landscape in mind. So what is the process if you're, if you're writing cyber in California versus cyber in New York versus cyber in, any of the other states? There could be a different process that you internally have to account for.
This is like filling me with crippling anxiety. Like the levels of complexity you talked about, right? Like, you have your jurisdiction, mostly states, but not exactly states, right? And then you have what line of business are you in? And then there are levels of nuance there in terms of what's possible, what data has to be captured. Like, this is a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot. Again, back to it's a ton of data being captured, and some of it is captured and kind of I would imagine sits in a system somewhere untapped. And so what are the insights that you can pull out of that if you were able to access it? And so part of that is intelligent intake. You've got the workflow there, but you've also got to have the system in place to be able to take in all that data and then push it down the line. And that comes into whole other, other systems and things that you have to account for to manage your reporting and everything else. So
giant, massive problem space, many systems, much complexity, a lot to chew on. So we talked about it's wise to carve this up and not focus on building like the end to end necessarily from the beginning. What are in this, you travel in different circles than I do. So what are you seeing in terms of what parts of the problem, various different parts of this ecosystem we're trying to solve when it comes to intake.
So there's there's actually, we didn't even touch upon it because I talked a lot about the underwriting submission process, but there's how do you ingest even internal documents into systems, right? How do you keep a record of those? So, you're in the procurement process when you're looking to partner even with third parties, where do those documents go? How do you ingest that information? How do you track those invoices? Which invoices, is, they're all differ, but they've got pretty much the same information in them. I understand that. But you've got that internally, right? You've got the billing system. So how do you generate those documents? How do you pull in all the right information from your existing systems to maybe automate the creation of those documents, and then push out to automatically distribute them, whether that's digitally, electronically, or by snail mail. Which still happens.
Fax.
Yeah. Fax. Yeah. Yep. In my time in insurance carriers, I did use the fax machine quite often, and that wasn't that long ago. That wasn't that long ago. But yeah, I think there's. It depends on back to this digital transformation. Where are you in that journey? What systems that you're using are ready to and have the capability to connect with via API or just, front end a lot of these data inputs to use them. And so you can do this at any stage within, I'll call it the policy administration life cycle, but even within just like the day-to-day, what makes the carrier move, from department to department or unit to unit. There's a ton of opportunity, I think, to automate anything that's coming in, that's information that should be captured. And we didn't even talk about it on the claim side, right? Like how do you get data in for the claim? How do you make sure it's the right data? How do you follow up? And that can get into like, intake of images and things like that from like, a claims event. And there's a ton there as well. But that's not the topic I forced you to talking about today. No, so we can save that for another one.
I want to foreshadow it a little bit with a naive question that I've had for a while now, which is, I understand why personal lines would want to, accelerate claims with automation, because like better customer service, and you want to keep people from going to the other company. But like, I don't know, why would a large commercial lines insurer want to accelerate claims? That's like how the money leaves. So is it actually just the same customer service story? Is there something else that I'm missing in terms of why someone would want to do that?
That is a very complex question.
Okay. Well, we can table it for now. We have more episodes coming.
I think that a claims related discussion would be that, like, that's not a 2-minute
okay answer. All right, stay tuned for the next episode. All right, well then, we're coming up on the hour. What didn't we talk about in this ecosystem? And your experiences on the insurtech investment side, at least the last little part of your career. So what haven't we covered there? Because that's a big and massively growing area, and I want to make sure we give it its justice before we wrap up for today.
Specific to like intake or underwriting, or I think I might have mentioned it, and it goes hand in hand with what we talked about today. But what from an underwriting standpoint, what we've seen a lot of is, I'll use that automation word again, but just supplementing the submission with third-party data. That one helps you underwrite faster because you don't have to ask all those questions up front, right? Like you're basically validating as opposed to asking. And so we're seeing a lot of opportunities for third-party data vendors that have combined the data in unique proprietary ways that can give you insights to what's happening with your book of business, even validate that what you're underwriting is accurate. So some of those NICS code solutions as well. I think, new and distinct data sources as well. So how do you underwrite someone when you want to use something that's not their credit score, right? So what are the alternative data sets that you can use to, behavioral analytics is an area that's growing as well. So how can you take this information to understand how someone, what kind of risk somebody is, just by the way that some components that, like, how are they on social media, or there's tons of data opportunities, even like with telematics. How does this person drive, right? Like what predictably, what can this tell me? All of that goes into the consideration for underwriting. But again, you have to have a basis of information to hit up those third-party data sets up against to compare and contrast, and then ultimately make the right underwriting decision, or figure out what variables you use to price a risk, and then by default pass those on to the states and get them approved by the regulators to be able to use that in your pricing.
So the components of the pricing model have to be approved by the state regulators. I did not know this.
Yeah, and so the regulators are I'm oversimplifying this, but are there to protect the consumer, right? Like, they don't want insurance carriers can't just use whatever they want to underwrite you, because there could be bias in those models. There could be bias against, certain demographics if you do that. Yeah. And so it is an art form. This is also something we could probably dive into, of just what are the variables that you use in your pricing model? How do you weigh those variables? Then are they approved by the regulators? And then there's a whole art to how you submit that, right? Like, you don't want to give away your secret sauce that everyone can figure out how you price risk. But there is some, it can't just be a black box. Like, there has to be some level of transparency there.
Some interesting information theoretic topics there, which I think marketing will definitely approve the claims episode. I'm not sure they'll go for that, but I'm interested. I want to learn more. Well, this has been extremely informative, and you've been listening to another episode of Unstructured Unlocked. My co-host for today, and as long as she'll keep coming back, is Michelle Gouveia. And stay tuned for another episode coming to you where we'll talk about all things claims. Take care.
Bye, everyone.